It started with that smell, that faint, bitter odor of burning oil that only car owners know too well. At first, he ignored it. Everyone does. A new car, a new dream, a new beginning. No one wants to believe that the shine can fade that fast. But as the smoke curled up from under the hood of his freshly bought sedan, James stood there, frozen, watching the symbol of his success melt into a nightmare. Imagine this. You save for years, cutting corners on meals, skipping vacations, taking every overtime shift possible. Then, you finally walk into that dealership, feeling like you've made it. You trust the salesman's smile, you trust the handshake, you trust the promise that this baby runs like new. But 2 weeks later, you are stranded on a highway shoulder, your dream car coughing its last breath, and the dealership's number suddenly can't be reached. James was not an angry man by nature. He was calm, deliberate, the kind of man who believed in giving people the benefit of the doubt. But as he stood there on that sunburned afternoon, sweat running down his temple and the sound of the dead engine echoing in his ears, something shifted. Not rage. Not yet. Just the cold realization that he had been played. The next morning, he went back to the dealership. The glass doors gleamed. The salesman, Greg, greeted him with that same salesman grin. "Oh, James, what brings you back so soon?" James explained the issue calmly, expecting accountability. Greg's tone changed. The warmth vanished. Suddenly it was, "We sold it as is. You must have done something to it." The words hit James like a slap. As is. That small print, hidden at the bottom of the contract, now stood taller than the entire building. He tried reasoning, pleading even, asking for at least a diagnostic or partial refund. But they laughed, not openly, but in that polite, corporate way that hurts worse than insults. "We can't help you," Greg said, folding his arms. "But you're welcome to trade it in toward another vehicle." The audacity of that suggestion made James clench his jaw. Trade it in? They wanted him to buy another one, another lemon, from the same people who just robbed him. That night, he sat in his garage staring at the lifeless car. He popped the hood again, just staring at the maze of metal and wires, wondering how something so shiny could hide so much rot. He thought of the dealership's glass showroom, the laughter, the confidence they wore like armor. And somewhere deep inside him, something darker started to whisper. It said, "They don't get to walk away from this." Days turned into weeks. The dealership refused to take calls. Emails bounced back. A letter from James's mechanic confirmed what he suspected. The car had been in a flood. Water damage masked, electrical systems corroded, the kind of car that should have been scrapped, not sold. James's jaw tightened as he read. They had not just sold him junk, they had forged the inspection. He filed a complaint. The state consumer office promised to look into it. But months passed, and nothing happened. Bureaucracy moved slower than justice, and the dealership kept selling more dream cars to people who did not know better. He saw one of their new ads online. Trusted by families since 1998. His hand trembled as he closed the laptop. One evening, his neighbor came over, a quiet man named Ron. He looked at the car, then at James. "Heard about what happened? You're not the first. My cousin bought from them. Transmission failed in a month." That was the spark. A name. A connection. Maybe even a pattern. James spent that night online, tracing reviews, looking through forums, checking local court records. What he found made his stomach twist. 15 complaints in 2 years. All the same story. As is. No refund. Scam. It was not an accident. It was a system. Imagine sitting there at 2 a.m., surrounded by files and screenshots, realizing that your story is one of dozens. That every smiling photo on their website hides another family sitting on a driveway, wondering how they were fooled. It was no longer about money. It was about principle, about dignity. James was not rich, but he was clever. He began documenting everything. Dates, names, VIN numbers, photos, even videos of the car's failure. He compiled every review he could find, every email that was ignored, every promise that was broken. And in that growing file on his computer, he saw something building. Not just evidence, but a weapon. He started visiting the dealership every few days, pretending to browse. Listening. Watching. The staff laughed, joked, and bragged about their sales numbers. But one sentence stuck in his mind. Greg telling another salesman, "As long as the titles are clean, we're untouchable." That phrase repeated in James's mind like a taunt. Untouchable. He left that day with a plan forming, half crazy, half brilliant. He knew one thing for sure. If the system was built to protect them, he would not play by their system. The next week, he did something no one expected. He started calling every customer he could find from those complaint forums. One by one. Some hung up. Some were angry. But a few listened. Then more joined. They shared photos, stories, invoices. The more they talked, the clearer the picture became. The dealership had a pattern of buying flood cars from auctions, cleaning them up, and flipping them as lightly used. It was organized fraud, hiding under clean paperwork. And now, James had proof. But proof is only power if you know where to strike. So he waited. He waited for the right moment. And it came one Saturday morning when the dealership held a big summer sale. Balloons, banners, smiling faces, the perfect illusion of trust. James parked across the street, his phone recording as customers walked in. And for the first time, he smiled. Not because he was happy, but because he knew they were standing in the middle of their own downfall. He just needed to pull the first thread. And when he did, everything would unravel. He began by turning anger into method. He did not shout. He did not storm. He organized. Imagine if every small grievance you had ever ignored found a voice. And that voice grew louder until it became impossible to ignore. That is what James built. He turned the fractured stories he had collected into a single, undeniable narrative. He stitched together photos, mechanic reports, phone recordings, and the dealership's own advertisements. He layered them until the pattern was obvious. Clean titles, hidden damage, the same scripted responses when customers complained. He did not go to the press first. He knew that headlines without facts are fleeting. He wanted something that would not only expose them, but make it impossible for them to hide behind legal maneuvers. He wanted proof that could stand in court, and spectacle that would force people to look. So he planned to hit them where their confidence lived, in the showroom, in the daylight, in front of their customers. He wanted their act to collapse on its own stage. Imagine standing across a busy street, balloons bobbing in the wind, the dealership's logo huge above the doors, smiling faces walking in and out. Now imagine walking inside with a calm that is measured like a metronome. That calm unnerved them more than fury ever could. James walked in with a group of his new allies, other victims who had decided that silence was no longer an option. They were ordinary people, a nurse who had been sold a car that died on the way to work, a young father with a newborn and no reliable transport, a retiree who could not afford repairs. Each had a story. Each had documents. They were not protesters. They were customers seeking answers, but they were also witnesses ready to make their evidence public. Inside, James did something subtle and clever. He did not hand evidence to management. He did not threaten. He simply asked for receipts, for the vehicle history reports, for details about warranties. When Greg or his colleagues offered vague reassurances, James smiled and asked for written confirmation. That tactic seemed small, but it forced the staff to create a paper trail. Cameras watch what people do. Paper shows what they promised. Both could be used later. Then James amplified the quiet. He began posting the verified documents across social media, but not as rants. He posted them as questions. He posted them as invitations. He wrote, "Why did this inspection miss flood damage?" and attached the mechanic's photos. He tagged local consumer groups and the state office. He recorded short videos of the mechanic explaining, in plain language, what the signs of water damage looked like. He asked followers to share if they or anyone they knew had been sold a suspiciously cheap used car. The posts hit a nerve. Within days, more people came forward. One woman posted a video of a car that had been reconditioned overnight between selling and showing, watermarks still faint on the carpets. A local taxi driver shared a photo of an invoice showing the vehicle had been acquired at a salvage auction. The momentum grew because each new post contained new, verifiable details. The narrative was no longer one man's complaint. It was a record of a pattern. But things did not move in a straight line. There were setbacks that were designed to slow him. The dealership hired a lawyer who sent James a thinly veiled letter warning him about defamation. They threatened to sue for lost revenue. They told other customers to stop speaking publicly. Some of James's allies backed away, fearful of legal bills or of being dragged into complicated fights. He felt the old, familiar pull to give up. It whispered, "This is too much." He might lose everything. He could be crushed by lawyers and paperwork. He refused to be swallowed by fear. He did not rely on bravado. He refined his approach. He consulted an attorney who specialized in consumer protection and discovered that the law was on their side when the documents were clear. The lawyer told him the difference between accusation and evidence. With a legal mind translating the facts into formal complaints and possible class action language, James and the others moved from social posts to legal filings. The dealership's threats fizzled under the weight of verified claims. Imagine now the dealership's boardroom the first time someone presented the compiled file in a meeting. Imagine their unease as they read names and dates and mechanics' signatures. That unease changed their behavior. They stopped ignoring calls. They started to call lawyers of their own. They began to scrub their records, to move suspect cars off the lot late at night. They tried to sell faster, to avoid public scrutiny. That showed James they had something to hide. He turned to one more tactic that made his plan unstoppable. He used the thing they most feared, their reputation. He wrote a concise, factual memo and mailed it to every local news outlet, every consumer watchdog, and every social advocacy group. He included the mechanics report, the auction receipts he had obtained, and copies of the dealership's own advertisements. He also included a simple letter to customers. If you bought from them in the past 2 years and had any major problem, call this number. The number rang. The responses poured in. Within a week, a local investigative reporter called. She asked straightforward questions and then asked for the documents. She asked the salesman to respond, and he gave the same dismissive answers that James had heard for months. The reporter's producer asked if James would be willing to appear on camera. He declined. He wanted the story to be about the facts, not about his grief. He wanted the cameras to show the documents, the flawed cars, the dealer's own ad that promised trust. The station ran an evening piece that was careful and exact. It did not sensationalize. It showed before and after photos, explained the mechanics, and played a brief clip of the dealer's as-is spiel. The headline asked, "How safe are our used car lots?" The story asked hard questions and ended with a call for the state to investigate. It was the kind of exposure that made regulators act. The state did act. Inspectors arrived unannounced. They cross-checked titles against auction logs. They pulled vehicles from the lot. They found discrepancies. Some cars had hidden frame damage. Some had been misrepresented. The inspectors did not arrest anyone that week, but they did issue citations and threatened fines. They also ordered the dealership to disclose prior repairs to future buyers. For the first time, the power dynamic shifted. But James wanted more than fines and disclosures. He wanted the system to change so that other people would not be taken. He did not want the dealership to adjust its marketing and continue in the same pattern. He wanted accountability that would echo beyond one showroom. He wanted them to feel the cost of what they had done. So he aimed for a decisive move that would force them to reckon with their own records. He planned to create a moment that would not allow them to spin the narrative. He thought of auctions, of titles, of the chain of custody for each car. He realized that if enough buyers demanded restitution or replacements at the same time, the dealership would be overwhelmed. If they could not meet those demands, the legal consequences would escalate. If they could not fix the problem publicly, their trust would evaporate. He plotted how to press that pressure point. He coordinated with the group he had gathered. They agreed on a date to return to the lot, not to protest, but to demand resolution in writing and on camera. They would do it together, in numbers, with their documents, their mechanics, and their witnesses. The plan was simple in concept and lethal in execution. Expose them publicly, create an administrative burden they could not ignore, and leverage the state's involvement to turn complaints into concrete legal action. On the chosen morning, the sky was gray as if the weather itself understood the seriousness of what would happen. People arrived in small groups, clutching folders and photographs. They walked into the showroom as customers, as victims, as a force that could no longer be dismissed. Their eyes met Greg's. There were no loud confrontations, only a procession of calm, precise requests. They wanted refunds, repairs, or formal agreements to fix the vehicles. They wanted the dealership to sign documents acknowledging the problems. That calm, methodical pressure proved effective in a way nobody alone could have achieved. Staff who had previously brushed off complaints now flipped through the papers with a visible tremor. James watched as managers realized that every signature meant a legal responsibility. The dealer's lawyer tried to stall. The state inspector stepped in to observe. Cameras were there, not for spectacle, but to record commitments. The scales were tipping. But the true turn that would later be called audacious, and for which the dealership would never recover its composure, had not yet occurred. James held a quiet reserve in his pocket, a legal mechanism he had prepared with his attorney that allowed a creditor to place a lien and, in extreme cases, initiate seizure procedures when contractual obligations were not met and restitution was demanded by multiple claimants. It was not a weapon to be used lightly. It was a final measure, designed for those rare moments when corporate systems refused to answer for systemic harm. He had not yet used it. He had revealed the cracks. He had brought the light. The next move would decide whether this would be a public shaming that healed nothing, or a forced correction that could change how cars were sold in that town forever. The dealership tried to regroup after that first confrontation. They issued statements claiming misunderstandings, promising internal reviews, and offering discounts to deflect attention. But by now, James understood something fundamental. Corruption hides an apology when the apology costs nothing. He was done with words. He wanted action that left a mark. He met again with his lawyer, a quiet woman named Avery who specialized in corporate compliance. They went through the documents line by line. Avery explained how the dealership's pattern of misrepresentation and falsified inspection reports could justify collective restitution and possibly seizure. If they default on their obligations, she said, and the state recognizes the claims, you can legally request to hold assets as security. It sounded surreal, one man and a small group of citizens possibly holding claim to an entire lot of cars. But it was not fantasy. The law had cracks, and through those cracks, truth could slip in. Over the next 2 weeks, Avery helped James file coordinated claims with each verified victim. Every claim cited breach of contract, concealment of material facts, and intentional deception. They attached mechanic reports, inspection certificates, and the dealership's own advertising copies. The state investigators, pressured by media and public outcry, fast-tracked the review. Within a month, they issued a formal notice. The dealership's license was under suspension pending compliance. Imagine that moment, a shiny dealership, banners still fluttering, suddenly silent. The same building that once echoed with rehearsed sales pitches now filled with whispers. Customers stopped showing up. Inventory stopped moving. Creditors began calling. And through it all, James remained calm. He did not celebrate. He waited. Then came the day that changed everything. The dealership missed its legal deadline to respond to the restitution claims. It was a technical failure, but a fatal one. That missed deadline triggered automatic default judgments in several cases, giving James's group temporary leverage over certain assets, including cars still unsold on the lot. Avery filed the necessary liens. Legally, those cars could not be moved or sold until the restitution hearings concluded. When the sheriff's office delivered the notice of seizure, it was almost poetic. Trucks rolled in at dawn, not with buyers, but with enforcement officers. They placed seals on windshields, locked the gates, and posted bright orange signs. Property under investigation. Do not remove. People stopped in the street to stare. Employees whispered in disbelief. Greg, the salesman who once laughed at James, stood by the window watching his empire collapse one sticker at a time. James did not gloat. He just stood on the sidewalk, watching. It was not about revenge anymore. It was about seeing justice breathe, seeing the system that had failed him finally move in his favor. But deep down, he also knew this moment was bigger than himself. This was the warning every crooked dealer in town would remember. News vans arrived within the hour. Reporters filmed the sealed cars, the flashing lights, the official papers pinned to the gate. The story ran that night. Local dealerships shut down amid fraud investigation. Customers went back power. James's name was mentioned briefly, but he refused interviews. He wanted the focus to remain on the pattern, not the person. Days later, letters began arriving from other towns. People thanked him. Some shared stories of their own. Small businesses cheated by suppliers, workers unpaid by contractors. He realized what he had done wasn't just about cars. It was about people reclaiming the right to not be silenced. But justice is not clean. The dealership filed for bankruptcy within weeks. Their lawyers accused James of conspiracy, of weaponizing the law. They tried to paint him as a vigilante. He stayed silent. The truth spoke louder than any statement. Courts dismissed their countersuits, citing overwhelming evidence of misconduct. When the hearings ended, a portion of the dealership's assets were liquidated to compensate victims. It was not enough to repay everyone fully, but for many, it was symbolic, a sign that deceit had consequences. Greg disappeared from town. The company's name was erased from the building. The lot remained empty for months, weeds creeping through cracks where once the latest models gleamed under spotlights. One evening, James drove by. The sun was setting, and the glass facade reflected orange light like fading embers. He parked across the street, rolled down the window, and listened to the quiet. For the first time since that awful day his engine had died, he felt peace. He remembered the first smell of burning oil, the first laugh they gave him when he asked for help, the humiliation of being dismissed. He realized that every moment of pain had built to this, not revenge, but redemption. He had taken back his dignity, and in doing so, given others theirs. He sat there for a while, letting the air cool around him. Then he smiled faintly and whispered, "That's for every honest man you ever cheated." As he drove away, his phone buzzed with a message from Avery. "They're reopening the Consumer Fraud Task Force. They want you to speak at the hearing." He laughed softly. The fight that had begun on a lonely highway had turned into something much bigger. Sometimes, the loudest justice is delivered quietly. One paper, one truth, one man refusing to stay silent.